Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me to discuss United Nations Climate Week is Lord Gregory Barker, Chairman of EM Plus Group. Lord Barker, it's great to see you again. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thank you very much. Great to see you, Jill.
Let's discuss the path to net zero and what it will mean through the lens of a corporation, global investor, and a regulator. How does each one of those quantify achieving net zero?
Well, I think the best you can do is look at your own business model. If you try and take a global view, it can be dizzying or baffling even. But every one of us knows our own business. And I think we have to be really focused on driving down the carbon emissions, firstly associated with our own production or the service that we provide. And then as we get more confident in doing that, we're going to have to look more broadly at the whole supply chain. But given where most companies are today in 2020, it starts with driving down the carbon emissions of your own business model.
There's enormous pressure, more so than ever in 2020, to tick off those ESG boxes. Is this a race to achieve sustainability or something that should be viewed more as a journey so that a sustainable, for lack of a better term, strategy can be achieved?
Well, I think some people hide behind the confusion around the ESG agenda occasionally. And I can see why. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there are, I think, 19 of them. If you look at sustainability metrics, they mean a lot of things to different people. So what we have to be clear is that the one area that's not negotiable is climate change, because there are some really quite hard-based, science-based metrics which can be very clearly audited and quantified. So I like to look at it. One, there's the climate agenda, the carbon agenda, which is very scientific and easily audited. And then there's the broader basket of just as important, but broader sustainability metrics. So it's not an either or. You can't choose to do one and not the other, but they require a different approach. So we're absolutely focused on driving down our carbon footprint, and at the N Plus Group, providing real climate change leadership within our sector. But that doesn't come at the expense of also being very committed to the broader sustainability agenda as well.
You're sitting on a panel Wednesday, September 19th, the Climate Group's Green Industrial Revolution. Give us a high-level overview of what the industrial sector must do for the Paris Agreement to be successful.
Well, it's going to be all about innovation. We've got to change. And I think as we come out of this pandemic, we are going to find that investors, customers, consumers are going to be far less patient to sit around and wait for industries to adopt a climate change friendly model in their own good time. I think there's real pressure now, particularly on the big 7 highly emitting industrial groups of companies to actually come up with a meaningful plan, which is why a group like the N Plus Group, the world's largest producer of aluminium and also the world's largest private sector hydropower company, are determined to play a leadership role, because we've been looking at the climate agenda for some time now. We think we've got something to say, but also we think we can help the rest of the sector point them towards the targets, the metrics, the new business models that need to be adopted if we're to meet those Paris goals.
Right, and let's talk about that specific to your company and the aluminum industry. What were some of those lessons learned from COVID-19, and what should be done to create a sustainable structure in terms of the environment and consumer preferences, because consumers are all value-based right now?
Sure. Well, I think the broader lesson, as I said, from this terrible pandemic is that people will not want to just go back to the status quo ante. They will be impatient for change, and there's going to be a real transformation agenda if we're going to rise to the challenge of climate change. And that's not going to be something that CEOs can pencil in for the end of the 2020s. I think investing institutions, customers, consumers will want to see a realistic plan next year, the year after, not sometime in the future. Now, it doesn't all have to be done overnight. And frankly, the scale of some of the change that we're going to see in various industrial sectors is huge and can't be done overnight. But that doesn't mean to say you can just put these things off or park them in the too hard tray. And what we are calling for to begin with is real transparency and honesty around carbon emissions, because it's the old adage, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So all of the big industrial sectors, particularly aluminium, need to start to being open about their own carbon emissions. And then we can have a sensible, pragmatic conversation about the best way to manage them and drive them down.
Lord Barker, while I have you, I want to throw another question at you. I want to understand what corporate buy-in truly is. You had said before, when you take a look at the environmental side of it, facts are facts, science is science. I certainly believe in it. There's a lot of people out there who might think this is a hoax, which I can't wrap my head around. What's your sense within the business community, with the corporate community, that there truly is buy-in and they're paying attention to the science and the data? I mean, when we went through COVID-19, there was a number of maps that you could take a look at, and you significantly saw the drop, let's say in China, for example, and of course over the United States with less planes flying. It was there in black and white, just how much of an impact it had.
Yeah, absolutely. But you don't have to be political about this agenda. You just have to respond to your customer. So if you're a producer of aluminium like we are, we know that the big customers for our industry, the electric car manufacturers, the packaging companies, the makers of renewable energy equipment and large energy infrastructure, they're all telling us that they have set their own goals for reducing their carbon footprint, either unilaterally or in response to what the end consumer is telling them. And we have to respond in kind. So we are just part of a wholesale shift in buying trends, in investment trends, that's saying, get a grip of your carbon profile and drive down your carbon emissions. We think that's actually a very exciting agenda. We've always been a company that thrives on innovation. We've got a long history of R&D, but we're going to have to double down on that if we are actually going to reduce our emissions in a way that's sufficiently ambitious to meet those Paris goals. Next year, we've got the COP26, the next climate meeting after Paris, that's really going to put the flesh on the bones of those commitments that were made 5 years ago. But this week, in a virtual New York Climate Week, this is the first time since the pandemic that companies, that governments, that policymakers can come together, share their experiences, take a stock take, and be asking themselves the question, what do we need to do now to make COP26, that all-important climate meeting next year, a huge success? Because what we do know is we can't just leave it up to government, that business needs to have a coordinated response, that business itself needs to have more partnership, and actually there's a place for civil society and the consumer as well. So it's going to be a lot more collaboration, but this is an important week on the climate agenda, even if people don't realize it.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I'll tell you, in the course of my coverage through COVID-19, whether it's an industrial company or a technology company, they really are looking for suppliers and vendors that are culturally aligned with the company itself. So you're absolutely right. It is a larger ecosystem. So I appreciate you for sharing that sentiment. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us on Trade Talks.
Great to see you.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.